But I think the reason that it stood the test of time is that it does use this heightened form. And by heightening your form and not speaking so directly and just literally about your own particular time and her own source material, then it allows us in.
Hello and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob, and this is the part of the episode where I normally say, and here is Jackson, and we're here to talk about a great script. But today, for the second time this season, we have a great privilege of welcoming a special guest to the show. So Jackson is not with us today. Instead, I am joined by Amy Marie Seidel. Welcome, Amy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's an honor to be here.
We are so delighted to have you. It should be a really fun conversation. We're doing something a little different for our season. We're revisiting a script for the second time this season. We talked about a play that I pronounce Machinal by Sophie Treadwell. I know that your production does differently, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. We discussed that earlier this season, and now we've set up to have a second conversation about it because of the great production that you are directing, New York Theater Company, directing an off-Broadway production of what you're calling Machinal at New York City Center, Stage 2. That runs June 7th through July 3rd. Welcome. We're glad to have you. Just give us the quick hitters. You're directing a production of Machinal.
Yes, indeed. Directing a production of Machinal that is, I think, in particular exciting because we take, first of all, I just want to say y'all's podcast on the play this season was so thorough, so brilliantly done, and I listened to it and felt like you basically already had a handle on what we're doing down there. So it was exciting to listen to. And our production takes some of what y'all talked about in terms of the more expressionistic sort of sides of the play, and we're kind of turning it into something that involves practical foley sound, that involves tap dance, in fact, and really sort of amplifying those more expressionistic qualities that Sophie sort of buried in there for us.
I'm so excited to talk about that and to sort of see how you unpack that, because what I call Machinal, the script, has what seems to be clearly like a soundscape or musicscape implied in the text. And so to mount it at all, you have to create some kind of sonic environment for the play to take place. And so I love this idea of making that like a practical thing the actors create in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've turned that, I call it an opening number now, because that first scene in the office, we took it from a scene that, as y'all talked about in your podcast, has all of these repetition of numbers, repetition of letters and filing codes and all of those sort of very mechanical elements. And we scored the entire scene. So it is in time. Wow. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting thing to witness, and it really immerses you as an audience in that first scene into sort of a train that stops and that starts and you can't stop it, and you feel the pressure on young woman, especially when this thing just goes, just the way that we all, I know, feel inside of the machine in our current situation and our current machine of life. It's that it just kind of takes off and it's ahead of you. And I think the way that we've musicalized it, and my choreographer Madison Hilgoss is a literal genius, and has laid down the most incredible sort of tap dance beat. And one of our dancers, Veronica, sort of holds it down from the beginning, and she has a typewriter. So she's actually an additional character in that scene that wasn't necessarily written in. And she sometimes even like comments with the typewriter. So wow. On top of everybody else kind of chit-chatting and talking about young woman and George H. Jones and if they're going to be a thing or not, everyone's commentary. And then she goes, like chicka chicka chick ding, right? And that's also like a commentary on it inside of this sonic universe that we're building. So it's been so much fun to make.
I love that idea, because one thing that we talked about last time is that the lines in scenes like that, and there are other scenes that have a similar sort of thing, although not quite in the same way, but especially in that scene, the lines can seem nonsensical, like out of context. Any individual line doesn't necessarily have a ton of meaning, but they mean a lot to the people in the office and what they're communicating to each other. But where Sophie Treadwell places us, the audience, is like outside of that. We don't have really any idea what's going on. And so you get this sense of something that has its own internal logic operating that we're outside of. And music and dance can function in that way, where there's a whole built-up system that is intentional and designated and follows logically. And so to attach lines into that makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's a really fun thing to do. And of course, young woman, she doesn't fit in this machine. She can't find her way through this machine. So she doesn't get to be on beat. She doesn't get to engage inside of that machine in the way. She tries and she doesn't quite fit. She doesn't know how to do it. She doesn't know what those insider things mean. It just can't sit in her. And so it's the other thing that we're playing with that's really exciting is sort of this literal truth versus emotional truth that I always like to think about. And there are these moments, like for instance, in the first scene when she talks about being in that subway and all the bodies pressing and all of that. We took some of that text and we actually split it up amongst the other characters in that scene, and they get up out of their chairs and there's this sort of moment of her emotional truth inside of that. And they're all pressing their bodies up against her. And it's this like very muscular moment. And then the next thing that happens is everybody sat back down. And by the time the lights change back to us being back in literal truth place inside of the office, it's almost like we've gaslit young woman that, no, that didn't really happen. We're just in the office. And she just had this whole experience of the bodies pressing and this like grotesque sort of moment. And we can feel so gaslit, I think, at times by the machine. And so that's one of the things we're playing with as well.
Yeah, well, and of course that's like so. It's not like classic expressionistic, but it takes that idea of distorting reality in a kind of dreamlike, or I guess in this case, like nightmarish way, as a way to try to communicate our inner experience of the world. And so this idea, you see this thing pack in around her. I mean, it makes so much sense in this play that like is the play of the expressionist era in a lot of ways. And that's, I think, well, we got a lot to talk about, and we got some stuff to do ahead of time, and we're already diving in just because it's exciting. So let me first introduce the folks out there to our guest. Amy Marie Seidel is a New York City-based theater maker who has worked on Broadway, off-Broadway, and regionally. She's a company member at Tectonic Theater Project, where she's developed numerous plays, including Here There Are Blueberries, a 2024 Pulitzer Prize finalist, recently nominated for 5 Laurel Awards, and Seven Deadly Sins, which won the 2022 Drama Desk Award for Unique Theatrical Experience. She has brought 2 major musicals to Broadway as assistant director, Paradise Square and The Great Gatsby. As a director, Amy is developing multiple new plays, including All the Frozen Ones by Stella Farah and Falling Forward, a new musical by Carl Amundsen and Emily Fink. She is also currently collaborating with the National Immigration Law Center in the creation of an interview-based play. Anything else you want to tell us about you so that we can dive in, with some knowledge of obviously you're directing, so that's kind of your lens in.
Yeah, that's such a weird thing to have your own bio read to you.
I know, it's the worst. It really is.
But today it actually feels pretty good because you talked about the Lortel nominations for Here There Are Blueberries, and the Lortels were last night, and we won Best Play last night.
Congratulations.
So thank you. That was a huge delight. And our projections designer, David Bengali, who's a genius, won for Best Projections as well. So
that's tremendous. Wow.
Knowing that I had to record record this today, I limited myself to a very respectable 2 drinks, but we had fun.
Wow, yeah, you limited your celebrations just for us. We're honored about that.
Yeah,
Anything
so
else that we should know? Yeah.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is, Tectonic Theater Project is very much my home theater company. And for those of you who don't know Tectonic, our thing is moment work, which is our way of devising theater. And it's a way of devising theater where we bring in all of the elements of the stage from go. Typically in the American theater especially, it's like, okay, I, as the writer, I'm going to go away. I'm going to brood over some idea in some script for 5 years, and I'm going to write it, and I'm going to force myself to write it and look longingly out the window. And then after those 5 years, I have a whole stack of paper that I deliver. And now the director and producer take it, and they have their concept, and they put their concept onto the play. And then from there, you get your designers. And then from there, you know that you have a production, you get your actors, and bada bing, bada boom, you're up on the stage. And then you don't even invite, the designers into the room really until tech. And then you invite your audience at the very end. We turn that entire model on its head. And Moises Kaufman, one of the founders of Tectonic Theater Project, as well as the artistic director, really codified this along with the rest of the company, this way of making theater where we bring all of that in from go. So we don't want to wait for tech to be hearing sounds and music. We don't want to wait to be playing with pieces of fabric and garments. We don't want to wait. And so we bring in early text, oftentimes unedited, sometimes just raw interview text, into the rehearsal room with actors and devisers and people with all different sorts of expertise, and make things that way. And now I've been so spoiled by this really collaborative, creative way of making theater that I find it difficult to go back to the sort of commercial approach where you just sit down, write a script, and then go from there. And I've been very, very fortunate that New York Theater Company entrusted me with this play. The thing that I was given was a tap dance Machinal, go. And it was, first of all, it's a great idea to begin with because it's inherently so rhythmic. So tap dance is a wonderful, wonderful thing to play with here. And I really sort of got to work with my company in a slightly unconventional sense, and in a way where we're able to play with some of our live foley. For instance, we have buzzers and bells and things that are actually actor operated, and we don't have to wait to hear them through the speakers because we're playing with them, and we're getting to score them in real time and being like, oh, that doesn't work there. And an example of that is actually during the trial scene. I love a good trial scene, just in general. It's a courtroom procedural, sign me up.
It's so performative already.
Exactly. That's what I was saying to people actually in the audition process was they come in, I'm like, this dude is a theater kid who never made it and just needed to go on the stand and show it off, And even the way that we're actually doing that scene, again, Madison, my choreographer, and I collaborated along with our performers on that one. And every single movement of that scene from the lawyers is entirely expressionistic in movement. So it's all choreographed. And so the lawyers are almost like animalistic. They grow to be almost animalistic in their gesture, and they pull out the evidence onto the table, bam, and then they take young woman's head and like show her the evidence, and they move together, and it becomes, like I said, the emotional truth versus literal truth. Basically, that entire scene is the emotional truth of young woman that ultimately piles up to then get us to, I won't give it away, but you kind of did in your last episode, to a very big moment at the end of the trial.
Yeah, well, and I think so much of this play is the young woman's experience of the world, and that like part of our our way into this world that is like our world but distorted is to understand it as this particular playwright's attempt to communicate like somebody who is in the middle of a trial that is, very confusing. And I love the court reporters. We talked about that last time. That's one of my favorite parts, that say, these counterintuitive, they interpret the exact same snippets of dialogue in totally opposite ways. You have to imagine, like, for somebody who's not used to being in the media spotlight, to have media whose job it is to drive, an arc, I guess in 2025, it's like views and clicks, right? But like paper sales in the time of the play, right? That like whatever gets people to a paper is the most important thing. That's got to be a wild thing to live through, that you are what gets people to the paper.
Absolutely. And Sophie Treadwell knew better than anybody with her background, of course, as a reporter. That moment, it's funny that you talk about that, because that was actually what I was getting at with the court reporters. And it was something that the actors themselves found. We actually have them with typewriters in that scene, and they're using sort of the practical Foley of the typewriter to comment on the scene throughout, and then turn out for those moments where they're being the reporters out to the rest of the world. And there are so many fun things that they found. For instance, when one of the lawyers talks about young woman being a stenographer, for instance, my actors just tried at one point a little bit of like a typey moment right after stenographer, and it's become this funny commentary moment of the typewriter sort of commenting on the fact that young woman was a stenographer, and it even helps to tie it back more to that first scene, and that the sort of clicky-clacky never-ending work of our society. And it's a fun thing to play with.
And that it's all part of it, right? That like even the machines that we interact with on a daily basis, that time, of course, the typewriters, now like our phones and it's all part of a society that drives this kind of a thing to happen. They all participate somehow, even the typewriter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's Sophie Treadwell's play does a brilliant job of showing things that might otherwise be seen as mundane. We're so used to them. All of us are so desensitized to this idea of going to work, click-clacking away on something that, most of the time probably has very little impact in our direct lives. We don't see a lot of the fruits of our own labor anymore. Everything's so far removed from us. We click-clack on our little machines from 9 to 5 or whatever it is, and we make sense of it all and go home and re-desensitize. But I think this play opens up for us how we as humans evolved to be a little bit differently. And it takes young woman in this play just not fitting inside of that machine, sort of the person who can actually raise their hand and say, this doesn't work. This is entirely messed up, actually. And the machine is like, no, here, let me sew you back into the machine. And even she struggles with that. She oftentimes throughout the play is weighing the possible benefits of attempting to fit inside of the machine. And I think it also goes to show in the lover scene in scene 6, the lovers is this, free love sort of like, out west energy, and trying to show her that way. And the main conflict of that scene, it's such a spar between young woman finally finding the person who she thinks might be her person. But in fact, that freedom that she's found is with somebody who inherently, that freedom means he can't be tied down. And so finding that freedom, the whole point of it is you can't actually grasp it. You can't own it. That freedom doesn't get to be owned. And yet she still is trying in that scene to nail it down in the same way that she's been taught by the machine. So it's,
I think she says like, well, we're never going to be apart, or it's a line pretty close to the effect of that a couple of times in that episode 6. And
exactly.
He of course says what I think everybody in the audience expects him to say, which is, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Why don't we just enjoy this moment instead of being so focused on the securing of this thing?
Well, I want to take this moment to invite everybody listening to check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's all one word, no hyphens, no underscores. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's where you can become a supporter of the show. This show is entirely run off of the support of people on Patreon. We're allowed to do this in this way by their financial support. So if that's you, if you're one of our listeners who's a supporter, big thank you to you. Episodes like this are able to happen because of you all out there. If that's not you yet, we just encourage you to check it out. Our lowest tier on Patreon is $1 a month. It's been $1 a month since we started. $12 for the year, and even that is hugely helpful to make No Script happen. We really hope you check it out. There are, of course, different sort of rewards and things, how the Patreon system works. Encourage you to check that out. Otherwise, we'll hope to see you over there, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. And now back to the script. So this would be the point in the episode. We've been chatting for a while. I would normally give an overview of the context and synopsis of the play. Because we've already done Machinal this season, I'm just going to refer folks back to that first episode. There'll be a link to the show notes, to that first episode, so you can check out if you want to know a little bit about the history of the play and also an overview of the synopsis, the story of the play. But I do want to start sort of where our context section ended, which was the productions of Machinal since about the COVID pandemic have really exploded in America, especially. There have been productions everywhere. Now, of course, your great production at New York Theater Company. And if you're in and around New York or have an opportunity to go, June 7th to July 3rd, check it out. New York City Center Stage 2. But this play has really... It's been produced pretty regularly in its more than 100-year history, but especially lately, there have just been productions everywhere. And I wonder, what is your sense of why this play has found such an enthusiastic audience right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are approaching a later and later and later stage of capitalism, and all of us are sort of feeling the pressures of that. Not that those pressures haven't existed, especially disproportionately to different groups of people over the course of, decades, hundreds of years. But I do think that there is something new happening in our cycle, especially in America, but also around the world, in that we are feeling increasingly powerless inside of the machine, politically, socially, economically. And so as people awaken a little bit to that, I think that we're longing for plays that can speak on that, especially in an allegorical way. Something that I think is super special about this play, so often plays that are written in their time, about their time, become irrelevant very quickly. This play was written in 1927, roughly, as you mentioned, around the events of Ruth Snyder and the murder of her husband, Albert Snyder, but also just sort of more in general about that period of time, a little bit about Sophie Treadwell's personal life, a little bit about that in general crime of the century, women murdering their husbands sort of idea. But I think the reason that it stood the test of time is that it does use this heightened form. And by heightening your form and not speaking so directly and just literally about your own particular time and her own source material, then it allows us in. It allows a heightened, it's almost like music and dance. It allows us to project a little bit more onto it, what we're feeling in our own moments. And I think there are many moments since the 1920s when this has particularly resonated, but I think that this might be definitely one of the most. But it's such a gift, and I think one of the most rare things in the world to write about a time that you're in, and yet it becomes universal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the way that the different very symbolic, very imaginative elements tell a story that doesn't necessarily, like, the point of the play, at least to me, is not so much about like the facts of the situation as it is about the way that it makes the young woman feel and the way that it makes us feel on her behalf about that being trapped as part of the machine, and that the feeling of that is more universal than the specific fact that we don't use typewriters anymore or such and such, right? And I think that
Exactly.
that's so powerful. And the other thing that occurred to me this time as I was reading Machinal that I don't know that has occurred to me before is how much it happens between the episodes. And how much of this play is about like the implied stuff, the stuff that doesn't ever really get a clear answer. Like we don't ever really get, nobody stands up and says, and this is why she killed her husband. Right? So there's so
we
much.
don't even necessarily know in certain productions until you get to a certain point in the trial that actually happened, because it's not in the script in so many words.
Yes, right. And the birth of their child is not in the script. And the actual like moments where the young woman and the man sleep together is not an onstage thing. And apparently they have an ongoing, he says in his letter to the court, like an almost daily relationship for so long, right? That's not on stage. So the amount of room that this play leaves for like implied or imagined stuff that I wonder if that amount of room in the text is part of what allows us to fill it with our more contemporary lived experience.
I think that's a really good estimation. I think it absolutely does that. Another one of the moments that is not explicitly on stage, though many productions do somehow stage this in their own way, is the wedding between young woman and George H. Jones. It's not explicitly written into the script. It's the last lines with the mother say, I think I am going to marry him, basically. And then the next thing that we see is them walking into the honeymoon suite. And so these gaps, I think all of those things that draw us up from this literal place allow that space for us to imbue it with our own experiences and our own expectations and our own culture that allow for it to be universal. And I think another thing that she does super well is she's playing in ancient rituals of symbolism. I mean, she's playing with one of our most ancient symbols, which is the moon, which comes up over and over and over, and these window motifs that she plays with all the way through. And everything that comes in through the window is illuminating her inner truth. So in the scene with the mother, you hear a baby cry, you hear many different things, one of which is an abusive relationship, this sort of oppression of what young woman's future could potentially look like that is weighing on her emotionally. And then the following scene when she gets when she's in the hospital after having a child, it's this construction noise, this relentless noise. And those are all there. They come in through the window, and I don't think that's a mistake. I think that it's so intentional that comes in through the window. And then we, in later scenes, get the moonlight coming in through the window. The moonlight that's, always, if you look at tarot cards, if you look at any other sort of symbolic expression, lunar is the wild. Lunar is also oftentimes the feminine energy, the wild feminine energy. And so for a young woman to look out and have a conversation with the lover about the moon, there's this thing that's awakened in her. It's the same scene where she finds the bowl with the stones and the flower that she eventually uses to kill her husband. And that's this awakening. And then in the scene where she does eventually end it with the murder, she feels that moon bigger in that scene. She says she can never sleep when the moon is full. And then she reiterates that exact same thing when she's in the trial. And I think that those are the sort of symbols that I think bring us back to our early human evolution and our real evolved selves of the way that we have come to be, the way we should be in many senses, in a way that feels wild, in a way that is very, very different and the exact antithesis to the machine that she's being put inside of.
And of course, it's no accident that the two scenes where she is alone with the husband, he has her draw the window shades, right? Very
Exactly.
intentionally, he's demanding of it that they sort of cut themselves off from the outside world. Very different than when she's in the apartment with the lover. And then also, we talked in our last conversation, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, about how some of the symmetry of the two parts of the play, and that there might be a way in which the office scene and the bar scene are kind of offset. And those two scenes are the scenes where there's not a lot of like window sound coming in through the window. It's actually more about the sound that's created in the interior of the space in those two scenes. And they're so different in what kind of sound is being created. I mean, in the office scene, they have a whole to-do about how nobody ever files anything under Q, which is like the most meaningless office discussion that you could have. And in the bar scene, there are these like real human stories playing out that like I find myself becoming kind of invested in the other little table stories in the bar.
Oh, absolutely. I loved when y'all talked about that in your podcast, because that bar scene for us, it feels a little illicit, right? Because she and her friend are meeting these guys and they're in this underground bar, and it's sort of the underworld in a way. And the way that we've done it in our production is that that's a queer bar in the 40s in New York, which could have and did exist at that time.
And that's
in that
even
place.
somewhat in the text. I mean, that comes right out of one of those table scenes.
Absolutely, yeah. So the table traditionally is two men, as you said. One of them is even called Boy, an older and a younger. And we've actually recast that to be two women in our production, in a way that the bar itself is a little bit more sapphic leaning, but has folks of all different ilks down in there. And young woman, while she's exploring this sort of illicit and more outside of the machine part of herself, she's down here and she's learning about that way of being. In our show, it's a queer bar. But also we see inside of these scenes, for instance, the scene about the abortion, the scene about sort of luring somebody to be with you in a way that feels like there's a power dynamic at play that's kind of gross, right? And so we get to see inside of these scenes something that's super exciting and super, super underground, but also, just as we're commenting on the machine of those in power and this thing that we're super inside of, we also get to comment on when we get to create our own spaces. For instance, in a queer bar in the basement, where do we find ourselves falling into similar patriarchal machines? And where do we get to free ourselves from that? Where do we have to look out for that inside of our own spaces that we create? And so we're playing with that from the beginning of it. It's this like raucous fun. It's one of the only times we get like a real tap dance number in the show. Other than that, the tap dance is really used as what we talked about, which is sort of like heightening our understanding of young woman's emotional truth inside of what's happening around her. But this one, we just started with like a bang, and Madison choreographed an amazing number with our wonderful tap dancers, and just, you know, we're using a lot of references from Gladys Bentley from the 1920s, and a little bit of that like freeness in being a woman that was happening at that time, and some of that choreography. So we get this release, and then we kind of see underneath the underbelly in the rest of the scene.
Yeah, boy, that just sounds fabulous. I mean, and it's
I hope so.
I mean, it really seems like it manifests too, especially in the way you're describing the tap dancing changing, the way that the tap dancing in the office scene is like emblematic, of the machine itself, and then using that in the way that it's intended to be used, right? Like as performance, as play. Really,
yeah, the freedom of it.
Yeah,
and
really
expressing your own inner metronome and your own rhythms that you want to put out into the world is very different from this like regimented, hard rhythm of the machine.
Yeah, boy, that's awesome.
One of the things that I watched early on is this amazing video of this steam engine. And I never even realized that a steam engine had so many different moving parts that all move in a different way and all move at a different pace. And so there are these giant, like, heaving arms that go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then there's this little guy at the top who, like, has little two kind of like balls on either side and is like spinning a mile a minute, like, and then these, you know, these other sort of like arms that are just muscular, up, down, up, down. And it's like every single one of these little machine pieces has like a little personality in a way. And so we were thinking about those little pieces of machine as we were creating, especially the characters in that first scene, and how everybody, not all of them necessarily were meant to fit in the machine, but they've all made themselves fit into it in order to get by, in order to have a respectable life, because the machine squishes us if we don't try to find a way in. And so that's actually reflected in the costumes as well. Hanji Jang, amazing costume designer. I brought to them early on some high fashion photos where suiting was just sort of off kilter. Like one of the buttons was buttoned lower. And so it creates this like pleat in the middle of the suit jacket. And there's a high fashion photo where it's actually tailored so that that sort of mismatch is tailored into the suit. And I thought that is what it's like to put on the ill-fitting machine, but then over time sort of sew yourself into the machine. And so Hanji has done like a more than amazing job of finding 1,000 different ways of using this sort of suiting vocabulary in our entire company. And everything is just a little bit off, but depending on how subject to the machine they have become, they're a little bit more sewn into the just slightly off kilter version of this suiting. And I think it's going to be really cool.
That's awesome. And so how do you all work on like a play that has as many individual characters as this, with that, I mean, really brilliant way of imagining the visual, the kind of way that the visual represents the interior, but then across, 50 or 100 different characters that are.
Yeah, I'm so used to working on plays with like 1 million characters where everybody plays 8 characters. I'm sure. I don't know how to do a play where it's like, oh, you only play one person the whole time. The only person we have just playing one person is young woman. Everybody else, I mean, it just feels entirely ensemble driven, for lack of a better word. I mean, there are moments in transitions, for instance, where the whole amoeba of the ensemble comes together to deliver an object, and it's a little bit more like that. And in the telling of young woman's story, these people get to be different people, and they're very, very subtle shifts in terms of design and in terms of dialect and in terms of characterization that distinguish these characters from each other. Oftentimes very small, but for instance, my good friend Soph Metcalf is playing both the lover as well as the prosecution attorney. And I was particularly interested in that doubling of casting because it's the prosecution attorney who brings up the affidavit from Lover. And so there's this hugely virtuosic turn that Soph does as the prosecution attorney, and is running around, dancing around this table, and even at one point does like a little bit of a magic trick with the affidavit itself. And it's like there's all of this, wild stuff going on. And then once the affidavit is finally delivered, all it is that Soph puts their hair back up in the way that it was when they were Lover and just begins delivering the text. And it's this really cool, really subtle moment of virtuosity and stillness by juxtaposition to the prosecution attorney. So I don't like hiding any of these changes. It's my favorite thing to really see them happen on stage, and those shifts be a part of the virtuosity of this company telling this story.
And it's what makes, a story like this told through the tools of theater can be so uniquely powerful if you're not pretending like it's the same as if this were a film or a novel or a concert, right? The idea that somebody in front of you puts their hair up and is a different character is this theatrical language that requires it ends up how I usually talk about it when I direct is that it ends up requiring the audience to participate in making the thing by
Right.
the use of their imagination. And so they become, in some instances you want the audience to feel complicit, or you want the audience to feel participatory or whatever. But in this case, like that world of the young woman only works if you in the audience are agreeing to participate in making it. And for a play that's as much a condemnation of the world as it is of any individual character, like your participation in that world as an audience has some like weight. It like matters in the balance of that.
Absolutely. I feel that we talk about dramatic tension all the time and how we have to set that up and follow through on that. I don't think we talk enough about theatrical tension.
Yeah, yes.
Setting up a form, really watering that form, growing it over the course of a play, and then sometimes turning it on its head in the 11 o'clock minute. And when we leave the theater 10 years later, the things that we usually remember are those big theatrical moments of surprise, not necessarily, the exact nuance of the script itself, but the way in which it was told that can only be done in live theater.
Yeah. And it's so I've just found that like it's so important to keep those as our primary tools, because those are the things that are going to make people want to come out of their homes and participate in this sort of shared dream, right? That is the theater, is if we're willing to lean into its somewhat dreamlike qualities. And
they always say that we're going to die, that theater's on its way out. Yeah. They've said it every year for the last hundreds and hundreds of years, but guess what?
Uh-huh. Well,
that's the thing that nothing else can replicate it. Nothing else can do it.
And it's why I think like expressionism of all the little movements of the early 20th century has held on so much, is that it is uniquely suited to use what theater has to offer.
Exactly. 1,000%. I'm not always, but I am entirely uninterested in a radical realism play for the most part, unless you are setting us up for something different by getting us used to realism generally.
Sure. Great. Well, we're about at our end of our time. And so as we're thinking about folks who have heard about your production and are so excited about it, what are you excited about in this next month or so? You've got about a little bit more than a month until you open. How are things going? What are you all up to?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. It's a really fun time. We're actually on hiatus from rehearsal right now for another couple of days until we get back into the room together. So this period for me has been really diving in with the designers especially, and making sure that we are thinking creatively together about all those little sound cues and how we're going to amplify the practical Foley, and which desk drawers we need to be really functional so we can put the evidence into, all of those kind of fun things. We went floor shopping the other day, and now Madison has some floor samples to go tap dance on, all of that good stuff. And so I just always like to bring myself back to, this is amazing that we get to do this, that we get to go to a fancy, hardwood floor store and, tell them that we're doing a play, and then they're like, oh, we'll give you a deal because it's for art, and then we take a little piece and we pretend to tap dance on it. It's just the fact that we get to do this and we get to tell stories that hopefully can resonate with people in today's climate. It's just, I never want to be numb to the gratitude of that, because I've seen it happen in this industry where, the more and more you do, you can get more and more jaded. And I feel that happening in myself sometimes, but like, this is magic. I get to see Hanji took half of a collar and made it the most elegant, unusual piece of clothing you've ever seen in your life. That's magic. How did you do that? So that's, I'm just trying to sit inside of the magic of it.
Well, that is a tremendous, I think, recommendation, even if you didn't mean it as such, for our listeners to sit inside the magic. I think that's tremendous. The New York Theater Company's production of Machinal opens on June 7th at the New York City Center Stage 2.
Wait, Jacob, I have to interrupt you.
Oh, please.
We
yes.
never told the people about why we pronounce it Machinal.
Oh, yes. Great.
Versus
Please
Machinal.
do. Yes.
And I know the people will want to know.
They do.
It is a much contended pronunciation across the last century. But Sophie herself used the SH sound in it, Machinal. And there is a word in French, machinal, which means mechanical or automatic. But I have a theory. Pretty much everyone after the show came out started calling it machinal right off the bat. And I think it's because we in the theater industry are used to the Greek-derived word deus ex machina.
You're 100% right that's why. I agree.
Right? And so I found myself in the beginning wanting to do it that way as well. But actually, it's a French-derived word rather than a Greek-derived word. And so that is my little reason. But we will answer to all versions of machinal. So don't worry.
That's fascinating. And the other thing that I meant to learn more about when we did our last episode, but I just never did, was that for a while there, she actually called it the Life Machine as a sort of alternate title to the play, which I probably like Machinal or Machinal better. But the Life Machine has its own ring to it too that is sort of interesting because it has an insinuation that sounds like life affirming, right?
Yeah,
but I think if that were the title, say, you would sort of discover an alternate meaning of that through the course of the play, right? What like she really means by the Life Machine, and that is sort of heartbreaking in the way that the play is sort of heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see it. You can see it both ways. I like Machinal because I think in keeping with what we talked about earlier about the relevance of the play still 100 years later, it's more open. It's more curious. It's more, what is that? Which I think that she does throughout the whole piece. But it's even more fun to know that it's Machinal and know that it used to be the Life Machine. That's the best version of the title of the show.
Is the secret behind it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amy. It's just been a delight to have you aboard. What a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I'm really, really honored, and I hope that maybe some of your listeners will get out to City Center and see our little play.
I hope absolutely that folks out there do. If you have a chance to see this production, if you've read the play and want to continue the conversation, you can find us on all the regular social media sites. Our handle is @NoScriptPodcast. You can also email us, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. We will be happy to engage in further conversation with you. If you've enjoyed this conversation or any of our other episodes, please recommend us to your family, your friends, people you know that like conversations about theater, conversations about writing and themes and different genres and styles from history. This is the place where they can come and hear those kinds of conversations on a regular basis. Every Monday when we publish to Google Podcasts, we publish to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube, all those places. And a link to the new episode appears every Monday on our Facebook page. When we publish, including next Monday, when we're back with what will be the final episode of Season 14. Jackson will be back for that conversation. Until then, I'm Jacob here with Amy Marie Seidel. Thanks for joining us, Amy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.